Alright, this is just a little something that I wanted to do, which is, usually in all the years we've been doing these videos, one of my favorite things to do was talk about Nicolas Cage movies whenever they came along, which obviously was multiple times a year and still continues to be multiple times a year. And some of them are absolute shit, like we just saw one of his absolute worst of probably his whole career earlier this year with Willy's Wonderland. And funny enough, we've just gotten another movie that we're going to talk about first, which is Pig, which is probably him getting some of the best reviews he's ever gotten in his whole career. His Oscar win for Leaving Las Vegas included. And so I want to talk about that before we get into the shit, but yeah, obviously just the main reason I seem to love talking about Cage movies is just how it depends on who you talk to. There'll be people that say he's one of the worst actors ever, and there'll also be a lot of people that might say he's one of their favorites, and they mean it sincerely, which would probably be the camp that I fall into, because there's always, not only is he a truly great actor, but when you look at all this, straight to DVD or straight to streaming shit, which has been a majority of what we've been getting, there's always something there. Like, there's always something to talk about, at least. And he'll be in there giving it his all, no matter what the character is, no matter what the story is, or how unseen the movie is going to go, or how inexperienced the filmmakers behind it might be. He's always going to be there, giving everything that he possibly can. So that's, I think, why I'm so fascinated to just talk about his movies in general, and to see them as they come out. Because you never quite know what he's going to do next, regardless of what the movie is. Or you can say that about the movies themselves as well. Like I said, yeah, many of them are shit, for sure. You can't really get past that. But there's also a lot of guilty pleasures in there, and there's some stuff that kind of slips through the cracks that actually might not be that bad. I think we're dealing mostly with shit here outside of Pig, but we'll go into those individually. But as I was saying, I do want to start with Pig, which, as I started off saying, is him getting what's got to be some of the best reviews of his career, easily. And I wasn't quite sure, as I'm sure many people felt the same way, wasn't quite sure what this was going to be, because I had known that it was him and Alex Wolff. That's what I knew, like, way back, and I knew what the title was, but I didn't quite know what the story was by then. But I did know that Neon was putting it out, the same company that put out Parasite. And when I heard that news, I had joked with somebody and said, oh, it looks like they got another Best Picture winner on their hands. Because I was joking, because it was a Nicolas Cage movie called Pig. But I underestimated what exactly that could be, as I'm sure most people have. Because when you look at Cage's recent lineup, recent being in like maybe the last decade or a little after that, a little right before that cut off, where he does all these, strings of, straight to DVD shit or straight to streaming shit or whatever. And it's usually either he's the lead character and he's doing what he can, or he's got a very small part in it, but they're using his face to sell it because nobody else is in it. Nobody of worth is in it. But every now and then, in between those, we get Joe, or we get Mandy, or something like that, to show us that he's still here. And that the great actor is still in there for sure. The Oscar winner is still in there. And those are the ones that we wait for, and they make the journey through all the kind of shit, or even the guilty pleasures, ultimately really worth it in the long run. And obviously this falls into that category, especially when the reviews started coming out, and a lot of people were surprised because the plot was revealed to be that he had a pet pig, and it is taken from him in the night after he's assaulted, and then he has to go on a journey to find it, because he loves his pig. And that's the kind of thing that you hear, and you're like, yeah, that sounds like an insane Nicolas Cage movie, of course. So it's probably going to be super over the top, and very, like, John Wick, but with a pig instead of a dog kind of thing. and the pig is kidnapped instead of murdered. Um, I think that's what a lot of people thought it was going to be based on the story, and as you can probably guess by the stellar reviews, it is not that at all. Like, it's not even close to that. um, so, when we start off, he's obviously doing some really subtle character work already because he doesn't have a lot of dialogue right away. So, he's living out in the woods, and he's clearly grieving, and he's visited occasionally by Alex Wolf, who buys truffles off of him, and that's basically their interaction, because Cage used to be this really renowned chef until something mysterious happened that we're never really quite completely let in on, that has brought him to this life of seclusion in the woods with just this pig as a companion, and occasionally Alex Wolf coming in and out. And that's basically the only kind of connection to the outside world that he has now. And the way they play that, I guess starting with what exactly his life is out here, because there's so much that Cage has to do. And once again, a lot of this is done without dialogue. He does have a lot of dialogue as it progresses, but in these kind of starting off points, there's obviously this real mystery about him that we are going to get like hints at as the story progresses, even if they never quite give us a full picture, but that's clearly intentional, to kind of keep that, aura of mystery around him. But there's so many different facets to this character and the way that he's shaped, because you could see that he's like sort of this balance of he's got an arrogance to him, that likely has carried over from his renowned chef days. But that's always balanced out with something. Like, there'll be moments where he has moments of weakness, or he has moments where he's overpowered. There are those moments where we just kind of see the pain and loss within him without him having to really say anything. But then later on we see the determination that he obviously has, in finding his pig and getting it back. And eventually this sort of leads to an intimidation, that we can see, depending on the characters that he's interacting with and the people that he knows deeply, and that he can basically use that against them, in a way that kind of builds really naturally and kind of unexpected when it actually finally hits. And yeah, there are going to be moments where he might be capable of rage, or what we lovingly refer to as cage rage. But then there's also cases that are back into that subtle department where he definitely has like an understanding, especially if he's willing to get close enough to you, like the Alex Wolf character, for instance. So, and you'll get moments like, there's a scene where Alex Wolf is telling him a really tragic story about his own life, and Cage is kind of looking down, and then Wolf just kind of says like one thing, like just kind of elaborates on his story just a little bit further, and just Cage, he doesn't say anything or react really heavily. He just kind of looks up in a way, and you get the sense that the character is like really understanding of where Wolf is coming from. You kind of get just in like tiny moments like that, you get a grip on what their relationship between the two of them is. And then of course, Cage's character has this ability, like I was talking about, to basically completely see through people. When he has to come out of the wilderness and back into like the life of the city in order to find this pig, through the information that he's gotten quite quickly. And he has one particular interaction where it's clear that he and this guy at this restaurant know each other, this guy that runs this restaurant, or at least runs the kitchen. And when they're talking, the guy has this constant smile on his face. It's almost kind of eerie. But it's clear that he knows something that Cage wants to know, and Cage is going to break him down until he gets that information. And so he starts to just talk about this guy in a very deep and personal way, and the guy's smile never breaks, but you can see like in real time we see the progression of this guy doing like a fake smile to that smile being a mask for like the pain that what Cage is saying is bringing out. And it's really an incredible scene. I think that might be the scene that, like, when I realized I was kind of hooked on the movie, which is, it's about at the halfway point. It kind of gets. It took me a little bit to get going. Like, there's this whole sort of like boxing underworld thing they go into briefly in like the first half hour that I wasn't really that into. But then as we saw where this was leading, and how it was just kind of a stepping stone to get where we're going. Um, because as far as a story perspective, there's not really a whole lot to it. Like, it's really the biggest surprises come from like the simplicity of it. Like, you're like, it's so unexpectedly simple on like a story level, um, that after a while you realize that that's not really what you're that worried about. I mean, obviously, because of his character and what we've seen and how they've built it up, yeah, we are concerned, and we want him to like get his pig back. But it's like the whole narrative of it doesn't feel like the important thing here, especially when you see more interactions between him and Alex Wolff's character, and how much it feels like that's more of what the story is, kind of what kind of the focus is. And the really, basically opposite places they're coming from. Like, the two characters are like they're constantly brought together, and we sense a connection here, but they're just in pretty much every way opposites. Where we have Cage living out in the wilderness, but yet still completely sure of who he is. Like I said, almost to the point of arrogance. With Wolf's character, we have somebody who's very flashy, like he's got his car and he's got his suits and all that, and he clearly comes from this really high level place. Um, but he seems to have like no confidence whatsoever. And he's like basically struggling to like figure out who he is. Because he's obviously coming to be, like, he's coming from this place, like he's coming from this big rich background or whatever. But it's like he's still like constantly striving to be more, like he's striving to be more like sophisticated or something. But he can't, like, and more business savvy, but he can't quite figure himself out or get there in a way that like actually where he feels like he belongs. And like I said, just kind of seeing these two, they're basically like two puzzle pieces that are supposed to go together. And oftentimes, even though they spend a lot of movie together, they also get a lot of scenes separate. But the way this kind of all ties together, whether they're together or separate, is where I think the real strength of the movie is in just that relationship in general. And the fact that Alex Wolff is a young actor that's just increasingly impressive. And he's an actor where especially as he gets a little older, I'm really curious what directions he goes in, what kind of parts he ends up taking, and what kind of movies he ends up in. It should be very interesting given where he's been so far and how well he's done, how very well he's done with that stuff. And yeah, this is eventually taking us down some roads where we have to eventually reach some sort of final place, I guess you could say, without not spoiling anything or anything. But we eventually meet a very ruthless Adam Arkin. And when I saw his name in the credits, this was not the kind of part I was expecting. But he plays it very well as briefly as he's here, and really kind of and really kind of puts this whole full picture on like the Alex Wolff side of the story. Like I said, it all kind of, even it feels like things are coming from different directions. It all feels like one, like it has one emotional core, despite coming from different directions. And ultimately the narrative pretty much works that way. Like I said, the narrative is barely important. Like, it's a little important, but not near as important as all the character work that's going on here. And it does have, comedic moments here and there. Like, there's a moment where Cage steals a bike. There's a very, very Cage moment in this movie, almost to the point that it sticks out. And there's a moment where, like, I was talking about the whole boxing thing that was going on briefly. And then when he goes into this really, really fancy restaurant to confront that guy, he's obviously, everybody's wearing suits and looking all sophisticated, and you've got Cage here, fresh out of the wilderness, fresh out of getting his ass beat, and you can see it all over his face and his dirty clothes. And this guy, who's like all clean and well dressed, just asks him, "Hey, how are you?" Just just as casually as possible, despite how clearly not okay that he is. Um, and so little beats like that are where it there's kind of a lightness if it seems maybe a bit too glum at times. There is a certain balance, or enough of a balance there anyway. Um, and yeah, it just kind of feels like, especially I think when a lot of people going into this movie probably with it not being what they think it is, I think a lot of the appeal of the movie also is just how confident it is, like, in how downplayed it is. Like, it goes about as downplayed as it can possibly get. And like I said, it's really the simplicity of the narrative where you get, because you do get little story turns that are surprising, but just in the really, really subtle and simple ways. And I think that's where the surprises end up being, if you're prepared to go into that kind of story. If not, I'm sure you'll be incredibly disappointed, but I do feel like it's the kind of thing where you almost kind of want to tell people to go in blind, but it would also be probably much more beneficial to at least know a little bit of the kind of movie you're in for. Might help, because if you're in for something entirely different, this is going to really throw you off in a way and might put you off of it. But yeah, that's at least the way I saw it, was the kind of movie that it was. So yeah, and it's obviously clear to see why he's getting some of the best reviews of his career. I don't know that I didn't take to it as much as I took to like Joe or Mandy or something. Like Joe is significantly more comparable. But I would say I probably much prefer Joe to this. But I think that's just more of a how you connect with it personally is going to vary. But I can certainly look at it and admire it for what it is and how it is about itself and the performances in it and the character work and all that. So yeah, that's where I stand with that, I think. So let's just dive into the shit now, because it's because that's kind of what we were here to do. Because I was initially going to do this video before I saw Pig, but then I was like, oh, I can see Pig now, and then we can just throw this in here. So yeah, let's completely do a different curve and see how we got to Pig, and see where what all came in the couple of years before it. We're going to start with Grand Isle. And Grand Isle is a very interesting case because one of the first and only things I knew about it going in, actually probably the only thing I knew about it going in, apart from the fact that Cage was in it, was that it had a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is apparently of all the shit you hear about Cage movies and all the straight-to-streaming, straight-to-DVD shit that he's done, apparently Grand Isle is the first one to get a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes since Deadfall. I want to say Deadfall was in like 93 or something. It was in the early 90s, I'm pretty sure, the mid-90s. So that's interesting. But what's really funny about that is it lowers the bar so much, because the bar is already kind of low when we're in this territory. But with the bar that low, this whole movie just kind of came off as average to me. Like, if I didn't really have a bar set at all, I probably would have thought this was absolute complete shit. But when you really, really set the bar low, you can get average, and I'll probably forget about it in a week, and I'm not angry. That's that's as good as you're gonna get, I think. But it tries some things. It's set in the late 80s, for a reason I can't quite pinpoint. Maybe the lack of technology helps the story, but I feel like we were going to have a lack of technology anyway, because it's set in a hurricane. So, you take the power out, and there you go. But no, we're set in the late 80s, I guess. And as I was saying before, usually there's two things. Either Cage is the star, or Cage is the face they're using to sell it, and the actual main character is some no-name actor, which is usually the case. That's basically the straight-to-DVD way. Like, there's a lot of Bruce Willis movies and some De Niro movies are like that as well. But Cage especially. And in this particular case, Cage is a major player in it. He's the villain, actually. The protagonist is a guy named Buddy, who is another one of those no-name actors, whose name I could not tell you off the top of my head right now. And interestingly enough, once again, maybe this is because the bar is so low, but for a completely no-name actor in a movie like this, he's fine. Like, it didn't strike me throughout the movie, man, he is a terrible actor. But because that's usually the case. Also, it's not just that they're a no-name actor, because no-name actors can do great things. That's how people blow up and get discovered and all that. But in movies like this, usually it's a no-name actor on top of being a fucking terrible actor. But this guy is fine. Like, with the material he has, he's fine. And it's a sort of flashback thing where he's sitting in an interrogation room with Kelsey Grammer, who I did not know was in it when I started it. And it's Kelsey Grammer doing what I am pretty sure is an impression of Tommy Lee Jones. Not an impression of, like, any particular Tommy Lee Jones character, just Tommy Lee Jones in general. For some reason, once again. Because we're in the southern states and all that. And he's being interrogated about the shit that happened when he was stranded at Cage's house during a hurricane. This crazy ass Cage, who in the opening scene of the movie, a dude is trying to break into his house, and Cage kills him, just shoots him dead, and the body falls through the fence. And he, I'm assuming, disposes of the body, because the next day our lead character Buddy shows up to fix the fence, and that's why he's here to begin with. Unbeknownst to him, it's because a body fell through it that Cage had shot. And just immediately you get weird vibes from this movie. You've got Cage's wife, who's one of those, femme fatale wives that tries to seduce the unknowing dude or whatever, while her actual dude is lurking in the shadows, all evil and shit, and sinister. But the thing about that is, he's not so much lurking in the shadows. He's just straight up antagonistic the whole time. It's like, you're gonna have a dude come to your house and hire him to fix the fence. And just immediately, I guess because he's the villain of the story, it's weird how comfortable both of them are, just being so antagonistic towards each other. And having inane conversations like, he points out that Cage used to be in the Marines, and he's like, really, how could you tell? He's like, I was in the Navy. I don't know what that explains, but I guess that's how he knew. And that's what it is for a while until the hurricane hits. Just this really weird-ass dialogue, and it's probably trying to be weird and kind of throw you off, but it's just weird and not in really an effective way. Like, there's a point in time when they're sitting at the dinner table, the three of them, and I think the wife has gone to get drinks or something, and Cage looks at him, and he says, how long has it been since you had your cock sucked? But he says it in a very Cage way where he, like, really stretches out every word. And it's just weird for the sake of being weird, and in your face for the sake of that. It's supposed to be shocking that he would ask a question like that, I guess, just up front, but like I said, they've been antagonistic toward each other since they met, and they're strangers, so nothing's really feels like it's off the table here, like, right away. Which you would think would mean, no holds barred, they're just going at each other, but it's like, no, it just makes no fucking sense. So you don't really feel anything about it, it's just weird. It's just like, well, this is just poorly written. That's all this is. So, like I said, this goes on for a while, but then as it starts, once he's stuck in the house, when the hurricane really hits, you start asking a lot of questions, like, what the fuck genre is this? Because it sets itself up like it's probably going to be some sort of thriller or something. But then there's creepy dolls sitting on the dresser, and we linger on them long enough that it starts to feel like it's setting up a horror movie. It's like, I was genuinely going into this blind, I was genuinely starting to wonder if there was going to be, like, supernatural elements to it or something. No, it's just weird, fucked up people stuck in a house in a hurricane is all it is. Which, honestly, for a movie like this, is a much more interesting concept than we usually get. Like, usually they either try to make these really convoluted, overblown concepts that try to be super, super smart and elaborate when they're just simple at heart, and all of that is just dressing. But here, it's pretty straightforward about the fact that it's like, no, we've really just got three characters and they're in one location. And it's like, well, that's not, like, it's weird enough that we're in a place that feels adventurous when you look at movies like this, that have this kind of release and are of this quality, this recognizable straight-to-DVD quality. But then, of course, the wife starts to do her whole seduction thing, and then it starts to turn into this whole, like it's trying to be some steamy erotic thriller from the 90s or something. Which was hard to pull off even back then, so this sure as shit's not gonna have any sort of effect. But then, things are unraveled about what exactly Cage wants, and then it tries to throw in twists and turns and shit like that, because what else is it gonna do? And it doesn't have clever dialogue, so what else are you gonna do? Throw twists into it or whatever. Mainly coming down to the fact that Cage is the villain, Cage is super sinister. It goes from there. And you would think that that would add something to it. Like, you would think that's like, that would mean, oh man, if Cage gets to go all out and be the villain in a movie like this, he should totally own this movie then. I mean, he does kind of own it anyway, in the sense that he keeps it alive just long enough until it ends. But it's nothing too commanding or anything like that. It's not as exciting as it sounds, unfortunately. And I feel like there was maybe something in here that probably could have worked with a better writer, but a better writer was nowhere near this, so we can just put that thought out of our heads right now. And there is... so obviously him being the villain, there's going to be plenty of Cage rage, which, you know, is part of the reason we're here. There is a fight scene between the two of them that, once again, for a movie like this, because we're lowering the bar to this level, the fight scene is okay. It's not terrible until they start, like, really throwing punches, and then it's, like, hilarious. Like, they're not landing, and they have, like, stock sound effects. And it's, oh yeah, this is the movie I thought this was. Okay. There is a lot, and what's really funny is I was already thinking this before other things were revealed at, like, the very last second. When I say the very last second, I mean right before the credits rolled, things were still being revealed. But before more reveals even happened to solidify this, I was already thinking this movie has a lot of don't breathe in it. Like, it's a really, 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 really low-rent version of Don't Breathe, basically, without the blindness. And so there's that. And like I said, that just kept proving itself as it went, without saying too much, because, God forbid, I spoil Grand Isle for everybody. But, yeah. So, yeah, it could have been a lot more fun than it is, but it's not really. And it could have been crazier, probably, but it isn't. Not really. Like I said, it tries to get crazier as it goes with its little twists and turns, but they're not really working out. And you can see the desperation in the writing of, oh, we gotta do something, because, like I said, this is the kind of movie where dialogue is what excels, and we can't do that, apparently. So, we gotta work with what we can do, which isn't a lot, apparently. And this is what we have. So, like I said, that 0% on Rotten Tomatoes is pretty overkill. There are worse movies that we're actually going to talk about in a second. So, yeah, so that's not really the horror show that you're expecting as far as quality goes. But I mean, it's certainly not great, but it's, like, as far as, like, these, you know, nobody's going to see them Cage movies, there's really nothing that's any worse about it than there are with the others that are just relatively average. So, yeah, it's just whatever it is. So, yeah. So let's go on to Primal. A movie that probably looked, once again, a movie that probably looked a lot more exciting than it actually was. Because I had seen the DVD cover a few times in, like, some stores a couple years ago. And the cover, it appears to be Cage in the jungle. And, you know, and the title is Primal, and you're like, well, that could be pretty wild, no pun intended. That could be... I wonder what that is. So once again, I went in pretty much blind. All I knew is Cage in the jungle. Let's see what happens. It could be pretty fun and crazy and all that. Well, it starts off in the jungle. That's for sure. Cage smuggles animals for money. Exotic animals, especially. So he's looking for a white jaguar, and that's what the opening scene is. And right away, you kind of get that vibe. And you don't want to go into a movie and just immediately start hating on it. You want to leave your mind open, see what it's going to do, see what it maybe has up its sleeve, and then go from there. And if it wants to shit the bed later, then you can, you know. But when you're watching a movie like Primal and you know that it's one of those, low budget, just throw this out there movies that not many people will see, starting the movie with a Jaguar and making the Jaguar main focus, you would think early on in the production, like before anybody's even been on the set, one of the first questions you would ask looking at this script is, do you think we have the budget for this? Like, do you think we have the budget to make this look good? Or should we just run with what we have and hope for the best? Because this is not exactly a budget Jaguar we're working with. This is, the kind of CGI you would expect at this kind of low level. And like I said, the Jaguar is such a focus. It makes you wonder kind of why they bothered. Like, if that's your starting point, and this Jaguar is going to be kind of a focal point throughout, maybe you should have waited. Maybe you should have put the script in a drawer until you had a budget to be able to do this properly. I don't know what the hurry of getting the story of Primal was out there, but that happens a lot with these, especially in the next movie we're going to talk about. But let's try to stick to Primal, as hard as that might be. As far as the movie itself and its look, it does have the aesthetic of let's say, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't, but because we're already dealing with a small budget. Let's say it was shot on film, and then that film was put through a washing machine, and then ran through. That's what it kind of looks like we're watching aesthetically. So there's that, but there's another thing. Is at least you're thinking maybe, what about locations? The cover promised me cage in the jungle. And there's jaguars and shit, exotic animals, all that stuff. I mean, he's an animal smuggler. He's going to be in the jungle for a while, right? Well, we're kind of seeing him at the end of the jungle thing, when he captures the jaguar at the beginning. So the rest of it is the smuggling bit, where these animals have got to get from one place to the other. And the only way they can get from one place to the other is on a freighter. So a ship is where this movie takes place. So what I'm basically trying to tell you is that Primal is the Jason Takes Manhattan of Nicolas Cage movies. Where you're like, oh, that's a cool sounding location. I'd like to see what he can do in there. No, he's going to be on a ship the whole time. So, once again, just push it out of your mind. Cage in the jungle, not happening after the first 5 minutes. It's all on a ship, which movies like this have told us are just a riveting location. I mean, this place is just going to be bursting with personality. Even when you put exotic animals in there, they're not even really the main focus at all, unless Kevin Durant is killing them. So, that is the one thing. Where I was talking about how in Grand Isle it should have been much more interesting and fun. The Cage was getting to play the villain in it. Because a good villain, or at least a fun villain, by a fun actor that can do that kind of thing and make it interesting, can completely save a shitty movie, in the sense of making the movie worthwhile enough. Once again, bar down here. Yeah, I got pretty excited when the plot was rolling along, what little there is, and I realized that the main villain of the movie is Kevin Durant. So it was like, okay, we got something there, and to give him credit, he does work with what he has, Kevin Durant playing this villain. I do think the main problem is that I think it would have been cool if he played like a more cunning villain, especially with the one location. It could have almost been like sort of like a Die Hard feel or something if he was a smarter villain. But and it's not necessarily that he's a completely dumb villain, it's just that they're less focused on making him like cunning and more like just reckless and crazy, like just trying to show how crazy he is the whole time. And it's one of those. So I feel like Kevin Durant's certainly a capable actor. You could have given him something a bit more You could have given him a slightly smarter character, not just said, "Hey, just wreak havoc," and be that kind of villain. It's like when you're one villain by himself in one location, and you've got things at your disposal here you can work with. This movie could have easily had a smarter villain and maybe gone in some better, smarter directions, but it doesn't. It kind of tells you the fact that Duran's character is just the, oh no, he's just crazy and reckless kind of guy. Shows you where they were coming from on a writing standpoint in general. So yeah, we have other characters here. Famke Janssen's here, who I almost didn't recognize. And Michael Imperioli is here as the guy that has brought Kevin Durant on board and is transferring him from one place to the other. So, as you may have guessed, through all these explanations, Kevin Durant is going to let these animals out to cause more chaos. Basically making this Snakes on a Plane, plot-wise, just with exotic animals and they're on a ship now. But it's basically the story of Snakes on a Plane is what it is. So, all that in mind, on top of the fact that this is a Nicolas Cage movie, like, the whole reason I'm doing this is that Cage makes all of his movies a little bit crazier, and that's what makes them so fascinating. So why is it that I've spent so much time talking about what this movie is, and I've only mentioned Cage, like, briefly? Like, it's all the other stuff that this movie has going on. But you might think that that sounds fun and wild, and one location, exotic animals, Nicolas Cage. It's not that interesting most of the time. The animals barely have anything to do with it. It's a lot of it is spent on the crew, like the rest of the crew, which, if this were another movie, would be fine, because they're actually, like, the actors and everything feel like a lived-in crew together when they're having their scenes. But given what the movie's story is, you kind of expect a lot more out of it, and that just doesn't come. It's just not exciting at all, really. Like any attempts at dialogue or clever dialogue, whatever, they're just, futile. It doesn't matter. As you probably know going in. And like I said, any point it could have had to sort of try to make itself a little smarter, despite the absurd plot, which would have been possible. Like, it's through the villain. That's the key here that could have fixed this in some way and made it at least a little more interesting. But it didn't really take advantage of anything it had going. It was another one of those infuriating movies that it sets up so much, and it's like, we've got all this stuff to work with. We set up all these pins for ourselves that are so easy to knock over, and just, like, gutter balls are like the one pin on the end is what it's hitting. So and the supporting cast that we do know, like Famke Janssen and Michael Imperioli, they don't really get to do much of anything that's worthwhile. She's trying to stop Cage from doing whatever he's doing, and Imperioli is trying to stop Duran from whatever he's doing. So basically they're the killjoys. It's like, these are our two chances of a fun movie, Cage and Duran, and neither one of them are getting to do anything. But it's not necessarily Famke Janssen's fault or Imperioli's fault. It's the script's fault, because it's basically a boring-ass story with a pretty fun setup, if a familiar one. But this had so many opportunities, and it acted on like none of them. So we just got an average-ass movie here again. So that's basically all that Primal was. Isn't that anticlimactic? That's what it feels like watching it as well. So let's go on to Jiu Jitsu. And the funny thing about Jiu Jitsu is I started this off by saying that Grand Isle had that 0% of Rotten Tomatoes, which is like the lowest a Cage movie's been since the early 90s. But Jiu Jitsu was the one that I, like, heard the most shit about. Like, the way I heard Jiu Jitsu described by people was that this is, like, one of the worst things ever. So, for the third time, the bar is set as low as it can go before I walk into this. So it was like, Alright, so Cage did a movie called Jiu Jitsu. Where can I find this thing? And I typed Jiu Jitsu movie Nicolas Cage into Google and was not surprised at all to see the Netflix logo. So, it was just pushed in there like so much other shit. So, it is a martial arts sci-fi movie. So, much like Primal, you just kind of look at the things that they lay down for us from the get-go. Before we even walk into it. You have martial arts movie, science fiction movie, Nicolas Cage. It's been pushed onto Netflix. What could possibly go wrong? Apparently it was in some theaters. I don't know what small hole or cave these theaters are in, but apparently it was out there somewhere. So people paid like full ticket prices to see this, which is disturbing. But yeah, so we open with okay. So you go into a Nicolas Cage movie called Jiu Jitsu, and what's the very first thing you expect to see? Is it a poorly animated comet falling out of the sky? So that's the kind of movie we're dealing with. Yeah, I mean we were warned there was sci-fi involved, but I mean shit. Aliens, they're fighting aliens, so there's that. The main villain is basically Yoshimitsu from Tekken. If Yoshimitsu was a putty from the Power Rangers. And he comes down from this comet, or by way of this comet, or something like that. And that's what we're fighting. It's just one alien with a sword that came from a comet. So, and like I was saying before, the big thing here is to have name recognition, but not have them be in the foreground. So, because you have a lead character and you can pay people like Cage or Tony Jaw or whoever, Frank Grillo, to be here the whole time. Or you could just say, here's these fucks nobody knows. And we'll put Cage and, Tony Jaw and Frank Grillo and Rick Yoon kind of in the background more or less, so these characters can be the show. So this main dude, whose name I do not know, and probably won't, is running through the woods, and he's running from really poorly CGI'd throwing stars. And for one reason or another loses his memory. I don't know. He jumps into water, loses his memory, and he's picked up by fishermen. No, I am not accidentally explaining the Bourne Identity. That's this. So, as we watch this cast of no-names go through all these action scenes, I will say one thing I was very surprised by was that these fight scenes were not as poorly edited as I would have expected from a movie like this. But, like, there's not a lot of cutting like you would expect in these shitty action movies, because that's just the calling card of shitty action movies, is way too much editing, so you can't see anybody making contact with anybody. Use the stunt doubles as little as possible, I guess. But if I were to praise it for not being shittily edited, because that's where the bar is, all of that is outweighed with negativity, because we've got really stupid slow-mo, we've got really shitty CGI blood. Just everywhere. And all these attempts to make things more interesting than they actually are. And they just end up really weird. Like, I could see where a director on the, like, who's working on the set might think there are creative touches that might add something to this. So they're doing things like point-of-view shots, or the Requiem for a Dream shots, if you know what I'm talking about, where, like, when the camera was right on Jennifer Connelly as she, like, walked around, but it was, like, kind of distorted looking. That in action scenes for some reason. Alright. I can maybe see that working in maybe, like, really harrowing war movies. But this isn't it. There's a Wilhelm scream in this. There might be more than one. So that gives you an idea where we are. And that's not a, hey, everybody recognizes that thing, isn't that a cool homage to, classic sound or whatever. No, this is what we could afford. You can tell by the fucking comment, the poorly animated comment from the opening shot, what kind of budget we're working on here. And just like I was saying about Primal, at what point before you even step on the set do you say, do we really have a budget for this? And should we bother? Yet. But once again, just do it. Just whatever. Don't make like a small indie movie first that might be somewhat successful, then make your money, then get your budget or whatever. No, just jump right into the shitty CGI and see how far that gets you. We'll wait. That's pretty much what a lot of it is, and we have transitions that are like comic looking transitions, and I had to look this up because yes, it is based on a comic. So they were doing this thing to call back to that, where the transitions are, it turns to like comic animation and has like the panels and everything, and then we go to the next scene. But I'll be totally honest, before I looked it up, I would have completely believed that this was not based on a comic and they were just doing that for no reason. Like, I would have fully believed that. But apparently it's based on a comic, so that makes somewhat sense, I guess. Only trouble is you wouldn't really be able to tell by looking at the movie if it's based on a comic or not, based on just how out of place those transitions feel, on top of everything else. But, yeah, so they try to do some character stuff here. They really, really try. Like, when they bring Cage into it, he's clearly doing what he can, being the mysterious, wise person that he comes to that might get into one fight to really earn his paycheck, but ultimately not be in it that much, despite basically being the poster. He's the poster, but he's also the and credit, so that kind of gives you the vibe of how long he's going to be here. But we have an interpreter that's the comic relief, just completely humiliating this poor actor who's playing the interpreter, giving him this shitty material. It's like, I feel like they wanted it to maybe be Jason Mantzoukas or somebody, and they just couldn't get him. So it's just this dude just saddled with this material, when it was almost like they wrote it and they were like, oh, don't worry about how shitty it is. We'll get an actor that can improv, and he'll make it better. And then when they got on the set, they were like, well, we can't afford an actor that can do improv. We just gotta hire somebody to say the shit that we wrote. Oops. That poor person. And then this is another one of those movies where you have your badass stoic male characters, and then you're also going to have female characters. And why would you have the two? Not really for much of a balance thing, but just so there can be an inexplicable kiss towards the end. That seems to come from out of nowhere, has no build-up whatsoever, and these characters had no connection whatsoever, and the actors have no chemistry whatsoever. It's just there. Because that's what movies do. Because this director saw movies as a kid, and it's like, hey, I'm not going to pay any attention to how characters work, or how structure works, or how story works, or anything like that. Just, these are things that happen, right? So, I'm going to make those things happen in my movie, with nothing to surround them to make them make any sense. So, that's why that's here, apparently. As you can probably guess, it sounds like this is probably supposed to be like a campy thing or something, but it kind of doesn't really feel like it. It feels like it's taking itself seriously. And what's really funny is you would think Cage would be where the camp would really come in, but it seems to be the Cage scenes that the filmmakers are taking the most seriously. So there's miscalculations on this everywhere. It feels like. So once again, with all these elements, I think it's just kind of clear why it would be the wrong choice to stay out of camp territory and kind of more into the serious territory. But the question is like, even if this were a camping movie that just fully embraced itself, I'm still not entirely sure it would work. But it would still be forgettable one way or the other. But I don't know. I honestly don't know what you could do to fix this movie. It just kind of like you set yourself up, and it's like where Primal had all these things that looked like they could have made a decent movie or at least a fun movie, and it failed. I'm not really sure how you can put the piece of this movie together in any way that fits right. So that could probably be where a lot of the hate comes from. But once again, I think I just had the bar so low that I wasn't like completely miserable. So that's it. Takes a lot. It takes a Willy's Wonderland for me to be completely miserable during a Cage movie. Something that's just completely so far under bottom of the barrel that it's that it's just out of its own control in the worst possible way. But yeah, so once again, you gotta really, really set the bar low if you want to get anything out of this, but I don't really know much of anything anybody could get out of a movie like Jiu Jitsu, so it's just all the wrong parts trying to come together, and it's just not working, so yeah. I guess now we'll go into Kill Chain. It's like, where the fuck do these movies come from? They just, it's like Cage's IMDb page is just like making them itself. It's almost like these are like spirits of movies that don't even exist, but I know they exist because I've seen them from beginning to end. They have beginnings, middles, and ends, and other actors in them. It's weird. It's but Kill Chain is interesting in that, number one, it does have one thing that a lot of these movies don't, and a lot of straight-to-DVD movies or straight-to-streaming movies or whatever don't have, and that is, it has a real opening credit sequence. Like, usually with movies like this, you see where it's like, they just use, like, the shittiest, most outdated software, and it's just, like, regular font, white typing. It just says the title, just untriumphantly and just does whatever. This one actually goes through the trouble of having an opening credit sequence. Jiu Jitsu might have done that also, I don't remember, but well, this one, it still feels extremely stale. Like, of all movies, I was reminded of The Kitchen, the Melissa McCarthy movie, by this opening credit sequence, which is not a good thing to be reminded of. But it had something, like, it was clear, it looked like an effort had been put into it, at least, which is so rare when you're in this territory. So there was something. And then it even has, it fucks itself over. Not that it was going to be better or worse with or without this, but it's one of those movies that starts at a certain place and then circles back around, basically leaving you suspenseless, because you see a dead body of a character that's in it for quite a bit, leading up to it when it comes back around, but yeah, we know at a certain point where a destination will be. It may not be the ending, but a certain destination. It's like, I think we're about maybe at the hour mark or a little after when we come full circle, and then it goes into a climax, if you want to call it that. So we got that, but then when we go back to the beginning of the story, as far as chronological order goes, we've got a pretty strong nearly 20 minutes here. And for a movie that's only an hour and a half, that's ultimately shit at the end of the day, that's a pretty big chunk of time to be decent. Where we're dealing with three characters, but mainly two. Where it's two assassins that are kind of facing off from opposite buildings. And the one we're focused on is Veronica Mars's dad, from the guy from Galaxy Quest. And we set up that he's got a daughter that he's kind of estranged from. He hasn't seen in like 5 years or something. But he's trying to make it work. And he's trying to say, like, one of these days you're going to know why I was so distant. And because we know, because he's an assassin and he's doing that whole life. While he's also, the other assassin is trying to off him during this. And this is a whole scene, just kind of between the two of them. And you throw a prostitute into the mix, and you've got three. Who kind of goes from back and forth between the two. And it's an interesting setup. And then the concept is interesting, because the title refers to, obviously, one character is probably going to die, and then we follow the surviving character, and this is kind of the thing. It's like the thing of the movie until we get to Cage. And that's interesting in itself. It's pretty poorly executed. But the concept is there. Like, this is another one where it could have been a good movie, and it started off as a pretty decent one. But like as soon as this first scene is over, it just kind of immediately loses footing. Ryan Quanten is in it. He plays like the guy in the next part of the chain, and he might be a nice guy, but for my money, Ryan Quanten might be one of the worst actors working right now. Like I can't think of a movie I've seen him in where I didn't come out of it saying, God, he is not a good actor. And he's the next person we see after we transition from the first scene. So that's where we went, and then we kind of it lost itself. But even long after Ryan Quanten's out of the movie, it got worse. So we can't put it all on him. So there's that at least. But in between this, like I was talking about, just fixing the dialogue would surprisingly fix a lot of these shitty movies, honestly. And there's some lines here in this opening scene that are clearly not that thought out. Like when Veronica Mars's dad at the beginning is talking, and he's used this prostitute to basically look to see where that other assassin is. And then he's like, okay, put your clothes on and then you're done. And she says, oh, you don't want to fuck. And his response to that is, no, not since my daughter was 14. I don't really know what kind of answer that is to that question, but but I kind of feel like I don't want to know, so we'll just let that slide. But that's the kind of dialogue we're working with. That's the kind of dialogue that whoever wrote this apparently thought was clever, because it's clear they're trying to evoke some kind of classic genre here, or some bygone genre or something that was once great. But this is not going to be that movie. Did you ever think, even the people that wrote it, did you ever think this was going to be that? Like the kind of era you were trying to evoke. And it's just, yeah. But when we go on to this second portion, we have a shootout. Once again, this movie is full of ideas that probably sounded good, and even might be good ideas, but when you actually see them played out, I do wonder if anything occurred like the filmmakers when they were making it and putting it together, like in the editing process, where it was like, oh, this doesn't look like what I thought it would. There is a shootout in I think it's like a police vehicle. There's like the cage in the middle separating the front and the back. And you've got Ryan Quanten in the back, and you got the driver in the front. And you've got an in-car shootout. And I was kind of reminded of, like, if this had been good, it would have been like, there's the scene in The Equalizer 2, where Denzel is fighting the guy driving the car that he's in. And while this is happening, it was so well done, it felt like a car chase was taking place, even though it was one car. Because the action within the car was so involving and suspenseful and well executed. So when you say a shootout inside of a car, you might also think of the chase scene in The Raid, when Ron was fighting like 5 dudes at once, while there's like a shootout / car chase happening. All this stuff might come to mind, but when you actually see the scene, it's this guy shooting at point blank range, and Ryan Quanten shooting at him at point blank range, and somehow nobody's hitting anything. And it looks ridiculous, and it goes on for quite some time with nobody hitting anybody. There's a whole Ron White joke about that. The shootout at point blank range and nobody hit anybody. These are 2 dudes inside of a car that can't hit each other. This car is finally parked, and one of them is out of the car before one of them finally gets hit. It's stupid. It's so fucking stupid. So that's, you can see where, like I said, Ryan Quantum being a bad actor almost has nothing to do with this movie going off the rails really quickly after the really strong opening scene. Um, and it gets worse as it goes. Like that should be that's like what the chain and the title is talking about. Is it's just, if you thought this scene was worse, the scene's gonna be even worse, and so on, until it gets to its really convoluted last act. Um, but I don't know what else. Yeah, we get to Cage eventually, and I guess Cage gets a little something to do here, where he's like he's a hardened assassin, but now he's like laying low as a hotel clerk. And you'd almost think this would have like a Mystery Train kind of vibe, the Jarmusch movie, where it's like, maybe start at the hotel, and maybe have yeah, we just had like Hotel Artemis a few years ago, which was basically that. But and you have stuff like that, and Smoking Aces kind of sounds like this, but Cage gets to do a little something because he's basically getting to play two different characters, because he's obviously the hardened assassin that's kind of, off the job now, or at least in hiding. And when he's playing the hotel clerk portion of his life, he's like kind of like dorky, and you can tell he's kind of having fun with it a little bit. But that's about all I can really take away from this as far as anything that Cage would have gotten to do with it. Because like I said, when we finally get to where the whole movie happens, okay? Like, the whole movie's just kind of action and people killing other people and it going down the line. And then it's in like the last 15 minutes we get an explanation as to why all of this is happening. And if you think, and that can work if the rest of it is engaging enough and it leaves you wanting to know why all this is happening. But this isn't that movie. So when we get basically an entire 15 minutes of exposition at the end, you're just so far away from caring. They're throwing in characters here that we haven't seen yet, that we haven't heard about yet, that are apparently big players on this, that we never see at all. And then they mentioned the death of a major character that we've seen throughout the movie. I'm not even positive we saw that death happen. I don't know. Maybe I blinked and missed something, but it just I don't know. It was basically like we saw one movie, and then the last 15 minutes is like Cage telling us about a movie he saw that wasn't the movie we just saw. And it just feels all over the damn place. And then you've got this other character here who's like, who we get from, she starts off as like Ryan Quanden's girlfriend or something, and then she starts banging Cage, and the character is not really, they keep introducing a lot of characters here where you kind of, like, long after you've even given a fuck. But then her character in particular, though, is like, she's supposed to also be like another, hardened killer, so it's like she's right in this with everybody else, but she looks like she's never held a weapon in her life through the whole time, and it's all just, yeah, it's just a bunch of shit, really. Like, all these other characters that start showing up, and they're all trying to out badass each other, and it's just, once again, it's just embarrassing for everybody. So, like I said, and it's all just leading to that ridiculous, and like I said, convoluted might seem like an overused word, but it is exactly the word. Like, when I think of the definition of convoluted, I will probably, one of the first things I think about will be the last 15 minutes or so of this movie. And it's and just everything it tries to throw at us all at once and say, this is why all this was happening, and it's like, I don't care. I wouldn't have cared if you told me this 45 minutes ago, or even before that. Just none of it matters, because it's all about shooting randomly, about scenes of people just firing at things and making it look like gun battles are happening. Just making it look like things are happening is this movie's goal. And it's just a lot of nothing at the end of the day. It's so hollow, despite trying to look like it's doing so much. And yeah, and after such a strong opening scene, I can't say that enough. I don't know what happened. It's like the one writer quit, and the like one writer was writing a short film, and then it was like, well, we could just make this thing. We could submit it to Sundance or something. Maybe get an Oscar nomination in the short film category. We could do that. That could be fun. And then somebody said, no, this has to be a straight-to-streaming Nicolas Cage movie. And it's like, oh, you want Nicolas Cage to play one of the assassins? Like, no, we'll write him in later. Actually, we'll write him in at the very beginning. I'm gonna put some stupid opening in front of this good scene that we'll circle back around to later when all the suspense is gone. As if we had any suspense to begin with. The whole thing is suspenseless. The empty gunfights, the knowing where Cage ends up when there's only just a little bit left, and which characters are going to be there. It tells you too much, but it doesn't tell you enough to give a shit. So it's a dead end either way. So there that is. So let's end this on 211. 211, you may or may not be aware, is the police code for robbery. So I wasn't entirely sure what that was going to have to do with anything, judging by the opening of the movie, where we're in, like, Afghanistan, I think, and there's, like, 4 or 5 guys, I don't even remember the number, who appear to be soldiers, but they are confronting who has to be the dorkiest looking crime boss I've ever seen. He's just a nerdy looking dude in glasses and a suit, and they're confronting him about this money that they want. They're those kind of villains. It's like, give us our money, and that's all they can do and say. We don't know where this money's coming from or who has it or anything. It's just give us the money. The money. It's particular money, but we don't give a shit where it comes from. And then they kill this dude, and then we realize that this was basically just to introduce these jackasses. Because they're going to be the villains. They're going to commit a robbery. Nicolas Cage is going to get involved in this robbery. But it's not that simple. Because this movie has to bombard us with characters. Lots and lots of characters. So, worth noting, by the way, one of those soldiers, whoever they are, mercenaries or whatever, one of them is Weston Cage, the son of Nicolas Cage, so take that for what you will. That's about as interesting as the villains are going to get. So all these characters we're introduced to before we get to this robbery movie that's really not even that long, but padding. So we've got Cage, who is a cop, who is basically, you know, fed up with everything, and he's probably going to be leaving the force soon, and he's, I think widowed. There's a few of these he was widowed. I can't keep track of them anymore. But we also have an Interpol agent. We have a cop who is like Cage's partner, and his pregnant wife, who happens to be Cage's daughter. And there is an old couple that seem to not be connected to anything, and are only mildly connected to things, and everything falls into place. Then we've got Kenny, our kid who goes to school, who's like bullied, and gets caught defending himself by punching one of his bullies. But since he was caught doing that, it was like, oh, he's the problem. He's in trouble. He's going to the principal's office. And I guess because the director wanted to feel new and cool, Kenny is introduced by way of his cell phone, taking some sort of like video, like a through the phone point of view or something that we never see again. I mean, the phone does come into play, but it seems a little blatant introducing his character with that. And then we have Kenny's mom. And somehow all these people are going to have some sort of say or something to do amidst this robbery. Mostly it's to look worried. Or shoot randomly. Those shootouts I was talking about in Kill Chain that are just totally directionless and a lot of people shooting and not hitting anything. Oh, that's like this whole movie. If you like that shit, that's this whole movie basically. But looking at what all these characters, how all these characters come into play, really the only really important thing is obviously you know, Cage's partner and his daughter have an obvious place here. But as far as like Kenny goes, so here's an interesting development, I guess. Um, because Kenny is in trouble at school, because he's been sent to the post office for punching his bully and getting caught doing it without the bully getting caught, um, they're going to punish him by making him go on a ride-along with Cage's cop as like a scared straight thing. I don't know of any schools that would resort to that, especially just for throwing one punch. But we need a story. This kid needs to be amidst this shootout, so that's what we're going with. The kid gets sentenced to a ride-along by his principal. Maybe that's a common thing I don't know about. It could, maybe it is. I don't know. But it's weird to me. It feels like a shitty plot device to me. But maybe I'm wrong and that's an actual thing, but it doesn't sound like it. So I will be surprised. So once we set that up, yeah, these jack-offs come back into it and they start robbing a place, and get this, if I heard correctly, they are trying to rob $1 million. Remember the amount of money that Dr. Evil got laughed at for asking for? These guys are gonna steal that. So and it looks like these guys will probably have a much easier time doing that than this movie would have you believe. But that's what the whole movie is these guys trying to steal $1 million. So they just killed a crime boss. And they have to rob a place for $1 million. But that's the story. That's the setup. That's where we are. So we're getting real low on this, where this bar is. So that's what I was basically. That's what the rest of this movie is just directionless shootouts. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. That's just what the rest of the movie is basically. And once again, you can probably do that well. Free Fire is a movie that where like more than 2/3 of its runtime is just a shootout, and it's kind of amazing and done well because the characters are so fun and all that, and the actors are clearly so into it, and Wheatley is a really cool director. Not so much here. I will say, as far as the direction, this movie is, once again, very lowered bar. I was talking about with Jiu Jitsu of the lack of editing, the lack of over-editing. This movie is not as obnoxious as I probably would have thought it would have been. Like, you think about, you know, straight-to-streaming, straight-to-DVD level Cage movie, where most of it is a shootout, you're probably expecting the shaky camera movement and the constant cutting that most of these straight-to-DVD shit does. But it doesn't really feel like that. It felt relatively competent as far as how it was made, so that's a plus, I guess. But there's still not much to care about, really. Like, they really try to make us care, especially by making Cage's daughter and his partner's wife pregnant. But we don't give a shit at all. At least I didn't. It's such a classic, you know, plot move to make you give a shit when it's really just an act of desperation and you can tell so hard. Because we don't even give a shit about that other cop. Like, who gives a fuck about him? Like, there was really not, like, that's the thing, is like, he's got a pregnant wife, you better care about him, or else you're a piece of shit. That's all we're gonna give him. Like, you care about him or you're a piece of shit. We don't want to add anything else to his character. We don't want to do any work to make him likable or something. So it's like, if he gets hit, then, you know, say, oh no, that's your job as an audience member, because he has a pregnant wife. That's where we're leaving it. You know, I noticed another thing that might have made this seem so not that great by comparison, even if you have the bar low, is that you think about it. You're introducing a lot of characters at once, a few of which are cops, and we're leading to something that's going to affect all of these characters. And then, you know, there's like a bomb goes off. There's an extensive shootout, and all this stuff is trying to get all this stuff is at the center of this. After we've been introduced to all those characters to kind of build that up, this movie has a strange resemblance to Patriots Day in multiple ways. And constantly feeling like what was my favorite movie of 2016. Um, that's not going to do this movie any favors at all. It just made me want to watch Patriots Day again, and how powerful and exhilarating and visceral and emotional that movie is. All of the stuff this movie's lacking. I will say, despite all these pointless shootouts and this firing at nothing, and chaos for the sake of chaos in hopes that the audience stays awake, there is one kind of surprising kill that's pretty cold-blooded that genuinely kind of caught me by surprise. Which is, it's pretty late in the game when that happens, and I think it's just the cold-bloodedness of the way it happens. But that's about as much credit as I can give it. But get just a little bit of cage rage, because my son-in-law is out there or whatever. It's just that one scene really. Yeah, so, I mean, if you're into the constant shootout thing, maybe it'll keep you occupied enough, but it really doesn't offer that much, and they really, really tried with the characters, which is more than you can say about a lot of these, but, it wasn't working. I didn't give a shit about pretty much all of them, so there is that. Like I said, the most credit I can give it is that one kill caught me off guard, and it doesn't feel that obnoxious for the kind of movie that it is. With the kind of villains that it has, and the fact that most of it's a shootout. This movie could have been significantly worse than it was. So that in itself was kind of surprising, but that's the best I can say. That's, like I said, the bar's not even here anymore. The bar went through the floor. It's somewhere in the Earth's core, I think. So, but at least we started with Pig, so there's that, and at least Pig exists. So Cage has once again kind of said, yeah, I'm gonna do this shit, but I do this shit so I can do Pig, or I can do Joe, or I can do Mandy. So we get where you're coming from, Cage, and we appreciate you no matter what. The people that matter care about what you do. So he cannot hear me. So I think that's going to be the end of this. So I will try to continue to stay caught up with Cage as they come out now and not get behind like this. There's a couple more that I don't think I talked about in videos that came out, like A Score to Settle and Running with the Devil and stuff like that. I saw those, but they just don't really leave much to say. Running with the Devil in particular just felt really like it was trying to do way too much, and it felt really convoluted and weird. Yeah, Score to Settle had some weird shit going on as well. It tried to be really twisty in an unexpected way, which just ended up being weird as well. So, not really much to say about those anyway. But yeah, so I don't know what he has coming. He does have. There's the name that I can't remember off the top of my head. But he also has. I think it's called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. The one where he plays like an exaggerated version of himself trying to get into a Tarantino movie. That's something I can't wait for. And he's got that other movie I can't remember. I think Ghostland is in the title or something. But yeah, and obviously a lot of these straight to streaming or straight to video shit is going to be popping up as well, no doubt. Once again, so those good ones can happen. So they have a purpose, if not to entertain. So. Yeah, so we'll be getting more regular reviews, and then there's going to be a lot of shit in September and October throughout the whole month. So until we get to all that stuff, I think that's it.